Greetings, travelers. There are jobs in Final Fantasy XIV. If you play the game, you might be aware of this, or maybe you're doing a class-only challenge in the middle of my 14,000th run of Crystal Tower, and I lightly exhale out of my nose before navigating to the blacklist option. You do you. I just don't want to see it. Job design discussion, much like politics, hasn't really changed since Ronald Reagan, and is largely dominated by right-wing grievances. It's been 163 years, and we're still fighting the same war. The Blackest Night needs to be less punishing? What time period are we in? The Cambrian explosion? Be glad I'm not the one making the game, because my fix is that if TBN expires without breaking, it just fucking kills you. While I could sit here and continue to make fun of all of us, me included, for having tons of petty gripes, I'm going to zoom out and talk about job design in general, because when you see people on the internet debating about whether a button should be removed or not, it's kinda hard to parse how we even get here. As a starting point, a lot of criticisms and complaints in Final Fantasy XIV go like this. This job does something I don't like, therefore it needs to change. To which I ask one very simple question. Is it okay to dislike a job in Final Fantasy XIV? This isn't a rhetorical question because my answer is yes. It's totally fine to hate a job in Final Fantasy XIV. I hate some of them, as I make abundantly clear. I even hate ones that are popular, just like how I don't like some video games. It's the nature of existence. I don't take any issue with the first part of the logical argument, but the second part. If you don't like something in a video game, does that mean it needs to change? My answer is no. So many times I'm dragged back into these discussions because I'm a very vocal idiot on the internet. It always goes like this. Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO that lets you level all jobs on one character. It is unique in that aspect as long as you don't know about something like Final Fantasy XI or fucking RuneScape. This is kind of a holdover from some earlier design. In A Realm Reborn, you had to level at least 2 classes to unlock the advanced jobs, and cross-class skills were a thing. But it was more like you had to level a bunch of jobs to unlock everything you wanted. You didn't have to get all jobs to max level. Still, you would be forced to play stuff you might not enjoy just to unlock a cross-class skill on your main job that you did like. It's a very different game from what we have today, and this was a pretty big point of friction. If you wanted essential parts of your kit, you had some work to do. So, this is where the big change came in, replacing cross-class skills with the standardized class skills, removing the dual-class requirements for advanced jobs, and Final Fantasy XIV goes from a game where you have to level a bit of several jobs, to a game where you only have to level one, but you can level everything else, as long as we ignore the level requirements to unlock expansion jobs. That's how I viewed this design choice since forever. And for what it's worth, I think it's a good change. It is clear that players are in no way expected to have every single job at max level. That's why I always feel a disconnect when anyone talks about it as if it's the norm. It still takes a lot of time to level everything. It's a grind that is completely optional, like a lot of things in Final Fantasy XIV. If you truly dislike whatever it is about a job, nobody is forcing you to play it other than yourself. The only time I think this is a problem is if none of the jobs in the game are fun to you. If that's the case, you're probably not going to enjoy playing Final Fantasy XIV. Although, you can't fully judge a job until you have most of its kit, which usually kicks in at like level 70 minimum, sometimes more like level 99, and your low-level experiences are not invalid, but everything in the game sucks ass at low levels and is a separate, more specific issue than job design in general. But this makes sense, right? Because jobs are different. Just like all of game design and all of creative work, there is no objectively good choice. I know it's annoying to harp on this, but if we can't agree on this fundamental point, we can't even start to have a discussion about job design philosophy. If you find yourself in the logical argument I proposed at the beginning, you're going to have to start changing the second clause. I don't like this job, therefore, I'm not going to play it because it's not for me. Or I'll get it to max level and get the reward and never touch it ever again. Now that every person on the planet agrees with me all the time for everything I ever say ever, why would we want jobs in Final Fantasy XIV to play differently from each other? Because it's a big game and it can help it appeal to other players, and so that your designers don't get bored making the same thing every single time. But everyone on the planet already agrees with me. So instead, how do we make jobs different from each other? Job constraints. One way to make a job feel distinct is by adding constraints to them. Their job has some things they can't do that others can, or has some other conditional slapped onto it. Think of Red Mage melee phases. Unlike some other casters, it will be forced to go into melee range at points in the fight. That and Summoner. More importantly, this is where Red Mage does its biggest burst damage. This is something that makes Red Mage, and they can and will get punished for it. Cast times in general are a constraint along with positional requirements, and we can even use this same lens to look at something like meter maximums, proc overriding, and GCD speeds. All of these things can be viewed as constraints. This is but one tool at a designer's disposal. One that probably gets the most changes. Dancer used to be forced in the melee range on Flourish and could waste some procs. Samurai's cast time was longer and was true melee range. Black Mage had extra long casts all the time. Hashtag not all healers could freely weave. And Red Mage now gets a fully ranged phase during its 2-minute burst window. Let's put a pin in the 2-minute meta for now. I know it's where you're ready to throw hands. This is not about my opinion on these changes right now, but rather, I just want to point out that these constraints did make the jobs different. At the same time, they are the immediate point of grievance where people will get annoyed or upset and demand for it to be changed. Now, I do have my own opinions on what has been changed over the years. There are constraints that I'm glad are gone. Paladin used to be the physical mitigation tank. They could only reduce physical damage. As a result, it was unviable in Savage content because everything did magic damage. That and the DPS checks were fucked up and it didn't do a billion damage to compensate for shit mid. It was a constraint to make Paladin distinct, and I thought it was bad. I thought it needed to change. I'm glad it did. I am not immune to the argument. I am not immune to contributing to sanding away rough edges that exist in Final Fantasy XIV. The very same edges that can make jobs unique. I would just say, there's a big difference between a job being truly unplayable in certain content and a job being moderately inconvenienced. Before I go off track, let's do a bit of a perspective shift. How could you make physical damage mitigation a distinct part of Paladin's kit without making them unviable? By another tool in the designer's kit, job advantages. The other side of the coin is giving jobs opportunities to cheat or be strictly better than their counterparts in specific contexts. One button that managed to exemplify this, unironically, is Dark Mind. Dark Knight's Dark Mind is one of the funniest buttons in the game, because it's more like normal mind to a guy like them. It was hard to figure out when it was useful, especially for more casual players, until they added in the ability to see what kind of damage things deal after it already hits you. But when Dark Mind is good, Dark Knight will casually out-mitigate every other tank in that moment, essentially for free. All it takes is a little perspective shift from this is a button that is mostly useless to this is one of the most busted buttons in the game in specific moments, and hopefully you can see what they're trying to achieve with it. Don't look at what the button does now. If Paladin had a button that only reduced physical damage to make it really good in specific moments, it would work too. Lots of jobs still have these things, however small they might be. Viper has Uncoiled Fury, which means it can be forced to a range spot for quite a while without losing any damage. This can make certain mechanics way more comfortable to execute, or make Viper outperform other melees in fights/phases where they are forced out of range more frequently. This is one of the things that makes Viper, Viper without making them unviable. So, job advantages are a fully superior way to make things distinct and make everyone happy all the time with no problems whatsoever. Right?
Wrong!
One thing you have to realize is that most gamers are toddlers at heart and in mind. Someone sees another job getting an advantage and they start whining that they don't get to do the same thing. Why does Viper get a lollipop? I should get a lollipop too. I shouldn't have to say that this isn't true for everyone, but people will always complain. It doesn't matter what approach you take. The act of making things unique is the act of pissing somebody off. In reality, all jobs are going to have some amount of constraints and some amount of advantages to help differentiate them. If you view it strictly through this lens, this is a very practical and mathematical approach to looking at job design, considering the contexts where things are useful or useless, but there are other factors to consider, such as flavor. Let's take my favorite button to overreact about for content. A weave that spends 20 of a resource to make the next weapon skill deal 50% more damage isn't all that different from just weaving a button that spends 25 meter to do damage by itself. From a pure math standpoint. But that's not the reason I like the button. I like Samurai when I get to pool all of my resources into a big attack. Using all my Sen and even more of my gauge to get a big single hit is something I just like. Pressing a weave right before the cast gives it this little pickup beat, like a drum hit that makes it so much meatier. It's not just the cast time, it's the anticipation before it, and I can never start a sentence like that ever again. I don't care how this affects the math of the job, and motherfucker, I raid! In Dawn Trail, Tendo Setsugeka plays into that. I even liked it more when it had a longer cast time because it made it feel even more impactful for the 5 minutes I got to enjoy it. My mind did not immediately go to how this would be an inconvenience in Week 1 Savage or how it would change my rotation. This is good flavor. What I didn't like about a certain other version of Samurai when I was a casual player was Hagakure, because burning all my Sen to get more Kenki to weave more Shintens isn't cool to me. I don't want the payoff on my job to be getting a couple more flimsy stupid little weaves. Then I'll turn around and tell you that I liked Old Life of the Dragon on Dragoon where I got to weave 3 Nastrons. Because I like these jobs for different reasons. I don't want them to play the same or feel the same. It turns out, chairs are not one-dimensional. I don't want every ice cream at the counter to be vanilla even if she's my favorite. I know you're already typing up a storm about how Kenki management was super cool in Stormblood, and it made you smarter and better at having emotionally fulfilling relationships than me, and I don't play enough Dragoon to be valid, but we can agree to disagree. We are, and were, both getting different kinds of enjoyment out of the game. It's not wrong for us to have different perspectives, and different things will attract people to different jobs. However, I think way too many people are invested in proving that their changes are good in a raid setting and from a complexity angle, while completely ignoring the style and flavor that goes with it. Things that are equally important when looking at job design, just as much as the general vibe and aesthetics. So, when I start seeing stuff like damage over time effects getting removed from the game and replaced with stuff that might technically make the job play similarly in a raid setting, I feel like we are losing some of that flavor. Some people just like doing damage over time. They like reapplying and keeping a debuff rolling on the boss. It's art. Now, don't make every dot like Sonic Break because I like it when my dot is something I have to keep track of and reapply. That's another form of enjoyment as well in terms of how it's managed. Ninja still has higher base move speed than all other jobs, and it's just kinda cute that it does that. Casual Samurai players fucking love backstepping into MP. Casual Paladins love holding Passage of Arms. That's good! It's good that stuff like this exists. There are other factors to consider when deleting mechanics, such as how all of this affects feedback. Input goes in, output comes out. Every video game is a Skinner box if we want to view it this way. Feedback is one of the primary ways video games can make people feel things. There are more mechanics in Final Fantasy XIV that used to be more pronounced. For example, aggro management was not exactly difficult in the past. Pressing a button on cooldown-ish to hold aggro was not rocket science, but this is not about complexity. People just like doing something to hold aggro and or get rid of it. They get that feedback when they see everything attacking them if they're a tank, and not immediately folding if they're a DPS. It's a very visceral and obvious thing. These are forms of negative feedback that were an easy way to know that you did things right. The same way you know you did a good job if you don't get bone stacks and if you don't die. It's something you can see. Unlike damage, which gets obfuscated so much by the game that everyone is hyper-focused on if one of their individual hits crits in the opener and cannot see the big picture. I'm okay with the removal of these mechanics for what it's worth. But when people say they miss it, I think a large part of it is because they removed what was one of the most responsive parts of the game, and in its absence, it can feel like you are doing nothing. This has created the illusion that everything is about damage. The thing that I already said is extremely hard to see and feel in-game. This stuff isn't really visible unless you break out the abacus that's a dirty open secret to those in the know. It's not like adding a DPS meter or an uptime tracker is going to magically address the lack of feedback. Although, the current system can lead to some funny clips.
You died with 7 seconds left in the fight.
Yeah.
Your uptime for just even casting either healing spells or damage spells was 58%. Which means for half of the fight, you were doing nothing.
Oh!
No hate towards Volpixie. Anyone who's first tried to step into harder content has gotten the hand on the shoulder talk about their DPS. While some people think it sucks that players get embarrassed when they first learn the other side of the game because all their playtime up until that point didn't guide them in that direction, I think this actually shows Final Fantasy XIV working as intended. You can be blissfully unaware of the DPS side of the game and still enjoy it, even with these mechanics that were more visible being removed. Still, taking away other forms of feedback and de-emphasizing the more punishing parts of the game puts a big spotlight on damage. Damage that only starts to matter if you want to get into raiding. Something the overwhelming majority of the player base does not do, because they either don't have the time or don't want to put in the effort. Which is valid. Good, even. It's great that Final Fantasy XIV lets players enjoy the game this way, because it's not always about rotations. Before I start talking about rotations, let me just say, we can view everything through the lens of doing damage. Expedient making a mechanic more comfy is to make it easier to resolve and keep up damage. Old Astro having haste, it made somebody do damage faster, thus doing more damage. Optimizing your healing is so you can press more damage button. Optimizing mitigation is to let the healers get a few more hits in. Taking a piss before raid so that you aren't distracted mid-pull and can focus on damage, it's about doing damage. It's not wrong, it's just your choice to look at everything that way. Once you are in the 2-minute cycles of Samsara though, it is still worth looking at how buffs relate to differentiating jobs through their rotations. Raid buffs were quite innocent from their inception. Just a small little thing to give jobs some flavor and add a little bit to optimization. This could change dramatically depending on team composition. If you were metagaming, you'd just run the same comp every single time, but I'm going to ignore those people. In spite of this having raid applications, Dragoon giving out an eye to another player, Bard solely buffing the party, Monk only buffing physical damage, these are things that were largely intended for flavor. It plays into multiple lenses. From the gameplay lens, most jobs are keeping on top of timers and building meters. When keeping on top of timers as strictly as possible, they would naturally line up with buffs if others were keeping on top of their timers, unless you were a bard, but they always complain. And the buffs give an avenue to spend that meter to do a little extra damage. That's pretty much it. It's not that deep. It's just a cute little system. However, there were still grievances that if you took something like Monk into a raid, you didn't get to buff your casters, but something like Dragoon would be able to buff everyone. I know, it's annoying that it didn't fully synergize and caused Monk to be so bad that it cleared all the content in the game. There's still this lament out there that goes, if only raid buffs weren't super very duper important and people could mess up a few of them without it ruining the run, and then the devs wouldn't have to keep oversimplifying everything. And all I can make somebody else say for me is,
we live in that system right now!
It has absolutely nothing to do with the real viability of a job. If synergy was more important in the past than the buffs themselves, they would have always been held to line up with everything and the 2-minute metagame would have already existed. Even right now, a few burst windows not going super well because someone messed up their rotation, or because of some alignment drift, or because the job straight up doesn't allow it, is not going to have as much of an impact as some people seem to believe it does. None of the DPS checks in Savage and Dawntrail have been that tight. I would know. I cleared M11S week 1 with a buffless comp. Not that I'd recommend it, and neither would anybody who was in my group. So why do so many people care? So few people are in a group that hyper optimizes. So few people are in a week 1 on release setting where you might consider all the wiggle room you can get, and nobody is in a setting where they need perfectly optimized damage to clear, but they still have the mentality of an optimized raider. Final Fantasy XIV is a very balanced game. It prides itself on that, to perhaps its own detriment sometimes. It does have occasional hiccups like P8S, which probably needed to be toned down a bit. But it's so brief. We're talking about a 2-week period that a very small portion of the player base actively participates in, that an even smaller portion of is good enough to succeed in, that doesn't really define the rest of the game. No, it's not about raiding itself, it's always about raid culture. Something Why It's Rude to Suck at Warcraft by Dan Olson and Nathan Landell, also known as Folding Ideas. It's not about whether the damage actually matters, it's about how you need to demonstrate that you take the game seriously. But if you're rolling your GCD and have a concept of pressing some big buttons inside of buff windows, you're probably doing more than adequate DPS in most content that demands it. Instead, the balance changes for like the last 7 years are constantly addressing rotational issues with conforming to a metagame invented by raiders. Something as trivial as Dragoon not being able to start the fight in life phase. It doesn't matter if Dragoon does good damage over the course of the fight regardless. It doesn't matter if they've been a consistently good job for years. All that matters is that all jobs press all their big buttons in their openers, 3 GCDs after the fight starts under pots to maximize damage, because that's what good players do. These people do not care about balance. They care about conformity. You don't have to be a min-max player to beat hard content. You just have to be good enough. This section is for the people who need to hear it. A long time ago, there was a moment that's really stuck with me in my high school calculus course. Calc 2 can be pretty hard, and we all get an exam back. Not everyone had super high scores. Some people even got a C. Save your anger at the American education system for somewhere else. One student whispered under their breath, "God, I'm so fucking stupid." My teacher brings the whole class to a halt, not to chastise the student for their choice of language, but instead to say, "No, you're not stupid for struggling in Calc 2. You are not dumb for getting a C. You're on a cruise ship. Some people out here are in a lifeboat that has a hole in it. They can't even do basic algebra. You passed a Calc 2 exam. You are not stupid. It is totally natural to struggle in the hardest content Final Fantasy XIV has to offer. It is natural for it to make some parts of your job awkward to deal with. It is natural to feel frustrated at that. It is natural for the hoops to jump through to get a perfect damage rotation in said content to be obnoxious, to get an A versus passing. That's what the fight is there to do. You're not wrong for feeling bad, but it doesn't mean that the game is bad or that it needs to change. You cannot fix raid mentality. It is baked into MMO culture. It's what they do. It's what makes them feel alive. No amount of gameplay changes will ever fully satisfy them. I'm talking to you, team that tunes Final Fantasy XIV, which brings me to this. You should never cater to the whims of ultimate or savage raiders. I don't believe in design by committee. Fundamentally, if your thought process to making anything creative is to try and means test it against a focus group and a community at large, you are already doomed. But even if you do believe in this, if you truly think that we should cater to the majority of the community for every single thing in the game, you should never cater to raiders. Why? At the North American Fan Fest in 2026, Yoshi P said that about 20% of the player base at most clears whatever the current Savage raid tier is. I'm going to choose to trust their numbers because that sounded way higher than I could ever imagine. Still, at its peak, that amounts to about 1 in 5 players that actively raid and beat the tier. Why? In this design by community feedback hellscape, would we cater job design to fit fights that 4 out of 5 players never engage with? Does that mean we should cater to the 4 out of 5 instead? No, because I already said I don't like design by committee. I used to ask the question really loudly and annoyingly, who are these changes intended for? And the answer largely is people who complain. The squeaky wheel gets the oil. There is a consistent pattern of people complaining about a fight or a rotational gimmick and having it change, as long as they can frame it as a pain point. There's this adage that I don't exactly know who originally coined. I've seen it attributed to Sean Murray, the head of the No Man's Sky team, but also to Mark Rosewater, lead designer of Magic the Gathering. But it goes, players are good at identifying problems, but not making solutions. This sounds really good, but it really depends on what you mean by problems, because very few people can exactly pinpoint and verbalize what is specifically making them upset. I'm not even one of those people. Actually, I doubt anyone can do this 100% of the time. Instead, I say players are good at telling you how they feel. That's about it. They can tell you if they're upset, but they probably won't know exactly why, especially as things get increasingly complex or relate to anything remotely creative. Even then, all of this data is absolutely useless without an insane amount of additional context. Just for any complaint about a job's design in Final Fantasy XIV, I would like to know, are they a player who plays a job regularly? Are they someone who only dabbles in it? Are they currently leveling it? Are they someone who only raids? Are they someone who hyper-optimizes? Are they currently in the middle of progression and at the peak of their cortisol levels and venting about it online? Are they someone who only does the story? Are they someone with a lot of playtime? Are they someone who levels everything? Are they someone who watches videos online and gets caught up in a campaign from popular creators voicing their grievances? Or even better, is this even supposed to feel good? Some things are intended to be a little annoying. None of the context we've been getting in any of the patch notes come close to satisfying my curiosity. But it's very concerning that whoever makes these changes doesn't seem to consider all of this either. Surely we aren't just taking a look at what negative comments we find on our official forums and are basing our entire view of the player base off of that, right? right? It's not worth taking away what makes a job unique just so it doesn't elicit some negative feelings to some players every now and again. And since I shared this take, that I'm okay with a job being bad or frustrating in some Savage fights for the sake of it being unique, this next section is dedicated to me ranting for pure self-indulgence. Skip to 34 minutes and 16 seconds if you want me to sound almost composed for this video. Alright, the next person to tell me that they need to change stuff to cater towards downtime in Ultimate fights is getting their name written in the fucking book. First of all, you're not an Ultimate Raider. Don't fucking lie to me. Barely anybody clears Savage, even less people play this content. It's sicko content for sickos, like me. You want to talk about shit being painful? Right next to waterboarding, they're making people prog Omega Protocol. That's a really funny joke, but I am politically against torture. Have you done an Ultimate Raid? Have you ever done one of these downtime phases? Have you seen the DPS check? Probably not, if you think it means anything. They are piss fucking easy. On release, on content, a downtime phase has never been the make or break DPS check in an Ultimate fight. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. They could always fuck it up in the future, but for my sake, so that I can continue to never be wrong, don't fuck it up. However, that's not to say that Ultimate fights have easy DPS checks overall. They do put tight checks in these fights, but they're limited to specific phases that are usually full uptime. In fact, Reaper and Machinist, two jobs that infamously are not amazing in downtime and clunky and whatever other thing people love to complain about when talking about Ultimate fights, were already meta picks in Omega Protocol. Not because the fight didn't have big downtime phases, it does, but because they could save all of their meter going into the intermission check, which was super tight. When metagaming in Ultimate fights, you optimize for the phase that has the hardest check. You do not give a flying fuck about anything else as long as it's enough to pass. These jobs have already been meta desirable picks in an Ultimate fight in some of the hardest content in the game without changing a single thing about them. Actually, it goes even further than that. The very same thing that makes them not amazing in downtime is the reason why they are so good in this specific moment. You're not in the trenches. You listen to other raiders bitch and moan on the internet and think that you're emulating them by repeating the same bullshit. How would I know anything about playing a job that isn't as strong in downtime as it is in full uptime, but I don't care because it still works and I play it anyway because I'm comfortable on it and I like it? I play Samurai. Contrary to what you might think based on how burst works, Samurai only starts to outperform other melees when it has full uptime. Both because it gets to press more Madares, but also so it can fully tick Higanbana. It truly has nothing to do with how jobs perform in downtime, but just how people think it does, and how it will make the rotation not line up with the idealized version they read online. Yes, it sucks. That's what Ultimate fights are about. And since I know people are ready to threaten me, if I had the option to press the button that puts Chitin back in the game at the cost of making Samurai unviable, unplayable in all Savage and all Ultimate fights and throw extremes in there too for the rest of time eternal, I would press it so fucking hard that it would crack the earth in half and so fast that scientists would be reevaluating the speed of light. Because you want to know what I do when I'm done progging? I play the job that I like and every other piece of content where it doesn't matter. All of this relates to everyone's favorite choice of words, a job's identity. A phrase that I have deliberately avoided by lazily swapping some words around. What is a job's identity? Do they have a passport? A real ID? Whatever a job's identity is a lot more fluid than some people think. Going back to Paladin, Paladin is a job that's been through a lot in Final Fantasy XIV. going from only being able to mitigate physical damage along with its shield swipe procs on block to having its dot rotation and spellcasting phases and now burst mode. Every single one of these iterations could be considered a different identity that Paladin has had over the years. Some people like current Burst Paladin more than old consistent damage Paladin, but everyone still loves Passage of Arms. One common occurrence though is basically everyone who boots into the game the first time sees the sword and the shield and assumes that it's the best job at mitigating damage, which was hardly ever true in its history. Warrior was typically the better damage soaker for a long time. Is this a problem with these jobs' identities? It's not that straightforward. Everyone has a completely different set of expectations and preconceptions before they start actually playing the game and the job. There's an identity that some people think it should have, then there's how the job actually plays. People might be in love with the practical identity over their assumed one. One is not objectively better than the other. Just ask anyone on if they liked Old Summoner or not and you'll hear every spectrum of opinion on it. Final Fantasy also has to deal with the fact that it's Final Fantasy. People have their expectations of what a job does in other Final Fantasy games. There's still people that insist that Dark Knight should have been a DPS, even though that was never how they said it would be implemented in Final Fantasy XIV. Where's my coin toss from Final Fantasy V, huh? I've never heard of a Cult Crescent. The hard truth is, any of these identities could work. It's up to the designers to decide what a job's identity is and design into it. Whether that's playing into its theme, adding strict constraints to manage, or giving it opportunities to really shine, or really designing into all of that, into what they think will be fun. Saying games should be fun is a bit of a faux pas. If someone says this to me, I'm immediately going to start judging them for lack of worldly experiences. Not all games are designed to be fun. I should know. I beat Lobotomy Corporation twice, from scratch. In the pursuit of exploring different themes, there are many different emotions that video games will attempt to evoke. Frustration, terror, boredom, the optimization of my input lines while aliens undo all my hard work. There's a lot more than fun to be had. Then again, do I have fun experiencing all these different emotions? Fun itself is a very strange concept, but let's just say that there are games that make me upset and I love them. I'm going to recommend a great video by CritBuild where Renata Price talks about how games relate to pain.
The first element of difficulty that we need to talk about is probably the most fundamental and worst discussed: pain. Something that many games elicit, something that nearly all of us experience, and something that even specialized doctors struggle to precisely measure because it's so personal. Nobody knows how much pain you're in or what it's doing to you, except for you.
It's a good watch. I highly recommend it, as I steal some of her words to form mine. When people tell me that they find something painful or unfun in any game, I don't exactly doubt them. Things are painful. Sometimes intentionally so. Sometimes it's working through that pain that gives us the most satisfaction. Sometimes it gives into endless suffering instead. It's hard to convince people that I can find some things enjoyable specifically because they are painful. Going back to The Blackest Night because it was not a throwaway joke, the button is supposed to be punishing. It is what defines it. Unlike every other tank in the game, Dark Knight can lose damage by not fully using up a TBN shield. Does that make it a little awkward in raids sometimes? Does it make it scale in a funky way with gear? Does it hurt when you fuck it up? The answer to all of this is yes, and I like it that way. It's a part of the job design. It's a part of the job's identity, and it's part of the enjoyment. Dark Knight is not a job for everyone because of this button. This all relates to the core of what I really want to say. So much of modern Final Fantasy XIV design is all built around the central idea of minimizing pain, getting rid of any negative emotion that the gameplay might make any player feel at any point, at any level of play. Whether it's dropping a cast, drifting a dot, angling an AoE, or throwing buffs into downtime because they put a phase transition right here, you little shit! At the cost of what can make the game most fun and enjoyable, for me, it's personal. I'm certain I've said this exact same statement before, but it is very ironic in the face of the themes of Endwalker. Is this ludonarrative dissonance? No. Painful gameplay does not inherently mean bad gameplay. Some of the consequences of design will result in some pain. That pain won't be for everyone. I understand that because not everything in the game is designed for me. Even now, I'm not the majority opinion. People love the way Dawntrail plays. I know people that do. Personally, they love this 2-minute raid buff meta. They love that they've made jobs less awkward for ultimate fights. They love not having to move around to AoE packs and dungeons. They love reduced cast times on Black Mage. They love not having to stay on top of its many timers. They love making it easier to fit everything into burst windows and pot windows to make it the norm. Because this is not something that has an objective answer. It is as subjective as it's always been. Though I'm not currently happy with job design in general, it doesn't mean I hate everything about jobs, and it doesn't mean that everyone feels the same way. But solely designing around every piece of negative feedback, including my own, is not a healthy way to approach game design. For anyone who's annoyed at how things play right now, jobs are going to end up exactly like this again if something is not addressed in the core design philosophy. This all speaks to a greater problem than any individual change to any job over the years. I had a quick back and forth with Jason on Blue Sky, who I'm mentioning because I know Jason likes it when Final Fantasy XIV YouTubers bring him up. Sorry that I make other content. The idea being that once all the buffs in the game are gone, that the designers will finally free themselves from the shackles of simplifying everything in the name of a metagame. I really want to believe in this, but I had that exact same thought the first time Cleric Stance was changed. I had the exact same thought when Shadowbringers released. I had the same thought when they made all the buffs 2 minutes. It becomes increasingly more difficult to be optimistic. You can't make any creative choice without somebody out there disliking it. You cannot make all the jobs unique and have them be fun for everyone. My doomer prediction is that we will get some cool and crazy shit for evolved mode, like Dragoon's left and right positional, until people complain it out of existence. I expect the balance to be completely fucked while they try to tune things, and they will inevitably not weather the storm of impatient gamers. If I can have any effect on anyone, it is to get you to give them some grace with the new systems. There are going to be growing pains, and all of us might be trying a bunch of different jobs to find the new ones that we like. We're just going to have to accept that. I hate that this is where my mind immediately goes when I look into the future of Final Fantasy XIV. But this is how I feel. I don't change my opinions to cater towards whatever the majority thinks. I don't change it purely for the sake of content. I just feel this way. Such as feeling that Dawntrail's story was pretty good. An opinion that many people find hard to believe. This is another section about community feedback that I could not slide into the script in a really nice way. There's a lot that can be said about how feedback affects modern games, or at least how it appears to. I don't exactly have proof, but when I can hear the speakers at FanFest saying the exact same talking points verbatim that I've seen online, I can only assume that's what they're signaling. I do not have the time or the energy to get into spats with everyone who has a different opinion than me. I don't want to make constant noise in a desperate plea to keep things in the game that I like that others don't. Signaling that you will respond to negative feedback if enough people repeat it online is not just unhealthy from the game design standpoint, I think it's unhealthy from the community standpoint. Developers should not be exposed to the endless stream of vitriol that comes out of the internet. It only impedes their ability to work. You make the game, you're the ones that know how to do this. From the player's side of things, responding like this encourages people to be constantly pissed. Some amount of arguing is inevitable, but we can certainly try to discourage it. However, I can't tell if all of this is just thanks to my lovely corporate algorithms constantly trying to make me upset, so I'm going to blame tech CEOs for this one. You're safe for now, Creative Business Unit 3. I will not speculate further. I have no idea what things will actually look like in the future. I've said in the past that I like having combo actions split up, but I will not reject condensing them on principle. I will do what I always do when I hear proposed changes. Play the game myself and decide whether or not I like it. I refuse to get mad at a game that's not even playable right now, even if I can anticipate some problems. You can add all the fun advantages to jobs that you want, but if the fights don't constantly allow those jobs to take advantage, it will feel boring. The constraints are the things that people have to deal with the most often, and that's what can make overcoming them the most satisfying. If you think this will turn Final Fantasy XIV from a game where players stick to a hard optimized rotation, and instead into one where people have to plan out their abilities in accordance to what the fight allows them to do and where they can get an edge in order to maximize their contribution,
That's what the system is!
thanks for watching. I know some people wonder where I went for Final Fantasy XIV content, but it's more like I fell into a couple of giant rabbit holes. Not because I've been silently seething at the game this whole time. I make whatever I feel like, whether it's Final Fantasy XIV related or not. Thanks to my generous patrons for making that possible, and people who send me non-recurring donations through one of the other million sources of income in this godforsaken hellscape. Now let's get out there and... Yo, this evolved monk is looking rad as hell.